First, let me introduce in Chinese. 各位老师和同学们，大家好。我叫阿伦，我是泰国学生，我来自国际关系学院。今天我是本次活动的主持人。First of all, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Anon Suwano. I am a graduated senior student.
As I cannot speak Chinese, I'm going to introduce myself in English. I'm Siri Felix. We are the students from the Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies, Rangsit University, and we are MCs for today. First of all, I would like to welcome everyone to this lecture, The Changes in World Order, by Professor Xuetong. This lecture is the collaboration between the Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies, Rangsit University, Klang Panya Think Tank Institute, Royal Thai Embassy in Beijing, and Teva woro Bการ Institute of Foreign Affairs. And next, I would like to invite Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Nared Pantarathon. Please come to the stage.
Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to our honorable speakers, Professor Xuetong, and representatives from the Royal Thai Embassy in Beijing, distinguished guests, faculty members, staff, and students. First of all, on behalf of Rangsit University, I would like to express my most sincere appreciation to each and every one of you to be here. Special thanks go to Professor Xuetong, a world-class scholar, for taking the time from his busy schedule to visit Rangsit University to give a lecture and share his views and thoughts on changes in the world order, one of the most burning issues in 21st century international politics. Special appreciation for their collaboration and support definitely go to the Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies, IDIS, and College of Government, Rangsit University, Klang Panya Think Tank Institute, Royal Thai Embassy in Beijing, and Teva woro BการInstitute of Foreign Affairs. Rangsit University, despite being small in size, is strongly committed to sharing knowledge with other universities and members of the general public. At the same time, we always seek and welcome opportunities to expand collaboration network to all potential partners as a means to promote learning and experience sharing. Such special lectures as this one, I am confident, will serve this purpose. I also hope that this lecture can lead to dialogues and collaboration among institutions, faculty members, and students. Well, without further ado, let me invite Professor Yuan to deliver a lecture. Thank you so much.
Before Professor Yuan begins his talk, I'd like to get all of the guests to know more about him through his brief history and his remarkable workings. Professor Xuetong is one of China's leading experts on China foreign policy, national security, and US-China relations. At Tsinghua University, he is Dean of the Institute of Modern International Relations. Professor Xuetong is President of the Kenagi Tsinghua Management Board and Dean of the Tsinghua University Institute of Modern International Relations. Professor Yuan is Editor-in-Chief of the Chinese Journal of International Politics and serves as an advisor to several leading academic journals. A well-known academic in Chinese foreign policy community, Professor Yuan is Vice Chairman of both the China Association of International Relations Studies and the China Association of American Studies, and is a member of the Consultation Committee of China's Ministry of Commerce. Professor Yuan is also serves on several boards, including those of the China Diplomacy Association and the China Association for Foreign Friendship. Professor Yuan has written several books, including Analysis of China's National Interests, winner of 1998 China Book Prize, and Ancient Chinese Thought, Modern Chinese Power. Professor Yuan is ranked as one of the world's top 100 public intellectuals by Foreign Policy, an American leading magazine. His latest publication is The Age of Uneasy Peace on Foreign Affairs in 2019. And now it's time, ladies and gentlemen, please hit a big porch to welcome Mr. Professor Yuan Xuetong on the top of the stage.
And this situation is very familiar with what I know on our campus at Tsinghua University. So to deliver a talk here, I feel more comfortable than talk in the foreign ministry. Seems to me now I have friends and I can speak very freely, and especially we can talk some academic issues. And first, I want to express my gratefulness to the Dentist University and provide such a good opportunity for me to talk with the faculties and the students. I know this is a private school, so you must have a very high quality faculties and very smart students. So I'm 100% sure, and we will very good Q&A after I give my introduction. And also, I'm very grateful to Dr. Naris and about your organization and arrange this valuable opportunity. And since actually just now I see and they expect me to talk something about the Chinese foreign policy, I will certainly do, but I want more to talk about the international order, because this is the new trend and new change and new situation. And I think both faculties and the students, you want to know what's coming to us, to this world. Actually, in the class, I always raise a question to my students. I ask them, can you tell me the difference between the establish international new order and global governance? What's the difference between international new order and global governance? In most cases, my students failed to respond to this question. And for most of them, they regard global governance is just a new order for our age. The new order could be have different content in different historical period, but global governance is the content of a new order of our age. And then I tell my students, I said that this is a popular understanding about global governance and new order. Actually, there's a misunderstanding rather than a right one. And what I mean global governance? Global governance means a distribution of international responsibility. For instance, we require every country undertake some responsibility to reduce the CO2, to clean the air. Now you see we have some students who wear masks today, right? And the university closed because of the haze. And actually, no country, any individual country, you can keep your country with a clear air if other countries, if your neighbors pollute the air, right? So that's why we need a global governance to dealing, that means get a whole of the world, work together, dealing with this kind of a global wide threat to our life. So global governance is distribution of responsibility. Global order, international new order is different. Order, actually, in international politics, it means distribution of power. Human beings are very selfish. Everyone wants a power, do not want to have a responsibility. So then you find every country compete for power, but then reluctant to undertake the responsibility. So because the order in terms of politics refers to distribution of the power in 1970s, the developing countries said that, oh, the order is imbalanced. What do we want? We want to have the North and the South and share the power and have the equal or balance the power. So during that 1970s, the developing countries encouraged to establish a new economic international order. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the bipolar system ended, and was replaced by unipolar configuration. And the US becomes the only superpower, so the US said, wait a minute, we need to change the distribution of world order during the Cold War. And the world power should not be divided between the US and the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union no longer have the capability to compete with the US, so US will not share the international leading power with Russia, the inherited country of the Soviet Union. So Senior Bush suggests a term, establish a new world order. So at that time, I mean the early 1990s, new order refers to what? New order refers to US monopoly the international leading power. No longer the power divided between the two superpowers. Now we come to the age or the situation. A new situation is that people talking about a change in international order. So everyone understand that. Now the change in order means a redistribution of the power, mainly redistribution of the leading power. So you find that no matter China, no matter US, and no matter Kissinger, no matter any politicians, when they're talking about the change of the world order, none of them talking about what? The global governance. Global governance is not the redistribution of power, but the responsibility. They find that we move into the new age, and the rising power and the status power compete for international influence, but no one compete for international responsibility. And Trump and clearly tell the world, no, US do not want to continue the responsibility for the world. That means US do not want to undertake the leadership. Leadership, on the one hand, means you have the power. On the other hand, you have to undertake some responsibility. So for Trump administration, they concern the responsibility too heavy. And the US should not pay for that. Well, now we move into the age. People talking about what kind of order we are going to have. Well, what kind of order we are going to have? Everyone make your own prediction. And the scientists, and I mean political scientists, and the technicians, economists, journalists, all make predictions about the new order. The new order, people perhaps understand the new order from the perspective of technology. Then say, okay, the new order will be decided by AI, by robots, by 5G. Someone said, no, economists said, no. We move into the age of the knowledge economy. The new order will be decided by what? By knowledge. Then the world will be divided by knowledge of the class and unknowledge of the people. Not divided by proletariat and the bourgeoisie. So the people have a different concept about the division of the new order. Well, actually, if we want to know what is new order will be, not only look at into the policy adopted by the major powers, also you have to see what the components of the order, and then you can know what is changing. First, we have to define what is order. Order means, and international order, I mean, means countries settle down the disputes peacefully according to international norms. Then that means you can maintain the peace and maintain the regulation within the normal behavior and without a war, without major clashes. So that means we maintain the order. Okay, someone said that. Look at that. Since the end of the Cold War, and the world order has been there, especially for East Asia. And we enjoy the order, peaceful order, for several decades. And since the end of the war in Cambodia in 1991, this region is so peaceful. There's a lot of tension, there's a lot of conflicts, but there's no war. We have a better security environment than Europeans. And the Europeans cannot enjoy the peace like us. They have experienced a war in the Kosovo, in the Chechnya, in Georgia, and the European people, the Europeans are concerned their place, I mean their hometown, and Europe is more peaceful than us. Actually, that's not true. The East Asia is much more peaceful than them. Okay, now why people think the world order is changed dramatically will be, and then if we're talking about international order, there's two things. First, we are talking about what? We're talking about the peace and the war. The second is we're talking about the norms. The trait of the norm is a liberalism or non-liberalist. Just now we said that the order composes of three elements: norm, institution, and ideology. That means after the Cold War, we just use the Cold War order as an example. Liberalism dominating the world, like the Fukuyama said that, the end of the history. Democracy becomes the dominating ideology, ruled all over the world. The history is over. And based on this ideology, liberalism, and then Americans take the leadership, establish a lot of international norms. Most of the country and behave themselves according to these norms to settle down their disputes. And that's the maintaining the order. Meanwhile, some countries don't, like the Iraq and some countries in the Middle East. They do not behave according to this liberalist norm, so there's a violence. And the Americans said, okay, we have to punish those countries who violate international norms. Then what happened? And the U.S. take the leadership and launch the war or take sanctions and against some country violating the liberalist norms. Who are they? This institution is international organizations. So the international organizations will carry out this, use their resources and their capability to maintain the order according to liberalist norms, right? Well, now we find that. So these three components: ideology, based on ideology, establish norms, and establish institution, maintain the world according to the norms. Now, the things is changing so dramatically. First, the dominating ideology no longer that influential. Liberalism not only lost influence in some developing countries, liberalism faced the challenger domestically in US and in EU. The challenging of the pure ideology is anti-establishment. anti-establishmentism in the United States is not opposing nationalism, it's not opposing the communism, not against the socialism. Anti-establishmentism in the US and targeted what? Liberalism. They against liberalist elites, so-called liberalist establishment. In Europe, the challenging or the competing ideology is populism. Populism is gaining momentum in Europe against what? Also against liberalism. Because during the post-Cold War period, liberalism became a dominating ideology based on the support from leading powers in Europe and United States. Today, these two leading powers no longer support liberalism. In this country, liberalism is no longer that absolute welcomed ideology. More and more people dislike liberalism. More and more critique about the liberalism. They said the liberalism is wrong. And even Blair is a very typical liberalist politician. He questioned democracy. Why the democracy cannot effectively save the Western countries from the financial crisis of 2008 than those non-democratic countries. Fukuyama published a book and talking about the end of the history, and becomes so popular. Then what? Fukuyama published another article to criticize democracy. He said democracy is wrong. Democracy undermines Americans' capability. Well, very recently, even liberalism, like Mr. Hammer published a new book, The Failure of Democracy. Oh, right? I forget the exact title. Very recently, he said that the failure of the liberalism. The liberalism undermines Americans' hegemony and undermines Americans' leadership. Okay, why these well-known Western scholars and politicians suddenly becomes not that positive toward the democracy? Why they suddenly becomes critiques of the liberalism? My understanding, because liberalism has gone too far. Liberalism becomes extremist. Actually, it's not liberalism. Any ideology go to the extreme will what? Will go to the opposite direction, will becomes harmful to the society. For instance, in the US, and the liberalism emphasize what? The political correctness. What do you mean political correctness? Means inclusive and tolerance. How tolerant we should be? We should tolerate others different from us. We should tolerate everyone different from us and have the same equal rights. Very good. And then they have tolerated the gays' marriage. Not only that, and the gays said that we should enjoy the same social welfare, including what? Delivering babies. And also they said that, no, because the gays, they physically, they are as the same gender. But mentally, they have a different gender, the male and the female. So these people, psychologically, they said, I feel uncomfortable to go to the toilet and based on the physical gender. How can they do? In California, established a third gender toilet. So 3 gender, and the male, female, and the neutral. Well, certainly this is very tolerant, politically correct. Then what? And then the traditional people, the conservative people say, wait a minute, we cannot tolerate this no longer. Why? They said, no, if we take our children to the public, to the zoo, to the park, to any public place, there are 3 gender of toilet. Which one I should tell my kids to go to? They said, I do not want my kids from a very young to develop that kind of sexual orientation. So they said that, no, we don't like this kind of liberalism. I do not mean which ideology is good or bad. I mean any kind of ideology go to the extreme is bad. So when we're talking about the fundamentalism, it means they go to extreme. It doesn't mean the Muslim, the religion has a problem, right? And the same. And I come from China. Actually, if we really are loyal to the ideology of socialism, I don't think it's bad. But if the socialism go to the extreme, it will be the same. It will cause a lot of harm to the society, right? So here I will say you find one thing is changing. The dominating ideology, liberalism, is no longer that influential, no longer that welcomed, like last 20 years during the post-Cold War period. Because Europeans and the Americans no longer advocating the liberalism as much as before. And then what? The government's behavior will be different from before. That means they no longer obey the liberalist norm as much as before. There's another academic difference. It's anti-globalism. Anti-globalization and the counter-globalization. What's the difference? Anti-globalization comes from the ordinary people who suffered from the globalization, because globalization makes the society polarized at both international level and domestic level. Internationally, you find the G20 accounts for 85% of the GDP of the world. How about the other 160 countries? They only share less than 25%. Not very long, possibly just another 5 or 7 years, and the G20 will account for 90% of the GDP of the world. How about the non-G20 countries? The over 160 countries only share less than 10% of the GDP. So the polarization will become worse and worse at a global level. Domestically, no matter Thailand, China, US, Japan, and Germany, every country's polarization becomes worse and worse. I cannot see any country can tell me, and their social polarization getting improved during the globalization, during the process of globalization since the end of the Cold War, and every country's social polarization becomes worse. Okay, so that's why these low-class people, the people in the grass, dislike globalization. They said globalization only benefits those people working for the international corporations. They said top 500. But how about us? How about the vendor in the street? How about the people only own the small restaurants? They said we cannot. This is an early period. We call it anti-globalization. Nowadays, this situation a little bit changed. It's called a counter-globalization. This is not from the people. They're from the government. Government starts saying, I do not like globalization. And the UK take the leadership. No, wait a minute. I don't like to stay in the EU. We want to get out. We want to withdraw from you. So we have Brexit. And then the US, Trump administration, globalization is a bad concept. It's no good. It's not in favor of Americans' interests. Americans are first. We don't want to have the globalization. So American government no longer support the globalization. And so the US said, globalization means America have to undertake more and more international responsibility. UK, Germany, all the industrialized countries realize that if they participate in the globalization, what does it mean? It means they have to undertake more responsibility, but not more power. No one lacks responsibility. Everyone only lacks power. So Americans said, let's quit. Quit where? Quit from the Paris agreements. We do not want to reduce undertake the responsibility to reduce the CO2. And meanwhile say, hey, wait a minute. The responsibility for human rights is also a problem. High price. You say, okay, let's withdraw from the Human Rights Commission of the UN. And even education. Americans say, what is UNESCO? That's nonsense. Let's quit. What changed? The institution is changing. We're talking about three elements. First, ideology is changing. The second, the institution is changing. American withdraw from the institution talking about, hey, we want to establish new institutions. Temple said very clear to the world, Americans' foreign policy is to protect Americans' sovereignty. It's not to protect the world order. So I have here what he said. Temple, he said this on the January 22nd, just a few days ago. Actually, this is nothing new. He has said this several times. I just pick up the very new one. Truths like this, nations matter. No international body can stand up for a people as well as their own leaders can. Strong borders are a key to strong nations. This is how we keep our people safe and protect our sovereignty. Not only Pompeo, the State Secretary, and Pence, the Vice President, and Trump, the President of the United States, all talking about how to protect Americans' sovereignty at UN Congress. So you see, Americans not only dislike the current international institutions, and Pompeo gave a very clear statement at the Marshall Foundation in Europe. He said that these institutions established by the United States, it worked well before, but now they are no longer suitable for Americans' interests. We need to establish new international institutions. Well, what new institutions? I don't know. But then they said that, look at what China did. And China established AIIB. AIIB is a new institution. This institution have their own norms. And so they use the new institution to what? To redistribute international financial powers. So for Trump administration and the European countries, they're all concerned that, hey, what kind of new institution we need? Germany and France said that, okay, we should establish our own financial system and get independent from dollar system. And we will do our financial transaction through our own EU system, Euro system, instead of American dollar system, and prevent Americans' constraint, prevent Americans' intervention. And the typical case is Iran. Okay, Americans set sanction on Iran. Americans will say that anyone do not follow Americans' suit, and then U.S. will punish those companies. Even you're the Americans' allies company, and we will punish you if you have any business to do with Iran. So the European countries said, no, we don't want to. We want to maintain the treaty with Iran, so we establish our financial system. All of the companies, the European companies, can do business with Iran through our own financial system to do the transactions. So you see now the first element is the ideology is changing, but it is not clear what direction it is. Liberalism still the strongest one, and all of the other competing ideologies not as strong as liberalism, but they are undermining liberalism influence going down. Meanwhile, the major powers start concerned to establish new international institutions. So the second factor, institutions change. The third factor is norms. International norms. Most of the norms based on liberalist ideology. But when the European countries and the US no longer advocating liberalism, and then they said these norms have to change. That means reform the current international norm. Certainly, there's some section of the domain has no norms or no popular norms like the cyber. The digital economy and the cyber security is a new issue to the human society. We don't know how to manage these things. And that's why the 70 countries reached the memo at Davos concerning the negotiation for global norms or regulations to govern the digital economy, technology invention, and the cybersecurity. That is it. What it will be, I don't know. That depends on the result of a negotiation. What's the direction of a change of ideology? I don't know. I only know it's changing, but I really don't know what kind of new ideology will replace liberalism as a dominating one and the institution. And the United Nations is the most dominating international institution. But now there are strong requirements for reform this institution. All kinds of ideas, all conflicting requires, and all conflicting suggestions. How to reform the United Nations, how to reform WTO, how to reform World Bank, how to reform the IMF, I don't know. I only know no country is happy with any of these institutions. Everyone wants to change, and meanwhile, those countries has some capability, like China, US, and Germany. They say, okay, if you do not reform it, and then what? I'm going to establish a new one. And Japan also do the same. And the US withdraw from the TPP. Japan said, okay, you withdraw, I will do it. So Japan established a new TPP, right? And with the 11 countries, they set up their own norms to govern their trade among these 11 countries. They said, okay, you can quit. We even can establish an institution without Americans' participation. So that's the general situation, what we face. Okay, so after describe the change of the international order, I will talking about what will happen to the change of the order in next 5 years. Because if we do have a time limit, and from my understanding, you cannot give any realistic prediction. And human beings, the future is unlimited. So someone in my class, they all say, oh, finally. Some students said, oh, what will happen? Finally, it will happen. I said, okay, how long finally? 10,000 years? No one knows. And actually, from my understanding, human beings' knowledge may support prediction for 10 years. Definitely is not longer than that. Any prediction about the future of the world more than 10 years, relatively speaking, it can hardly be correct. So I will be safe, so I will talk about what will happen in the next 5 years. Okay, in different sectors, the change will be different. Not in domains of security, military, economy, trade, finance, and the culture, all the fields, and will move in the same direction. No. Different sectors and will move in very possibly different sectors will witness different change. Because at this moment, I cannot see any country to provide global leadership. US doesn't want to do it. China doesn't have that capability to do it. I can't see any country has the capability to do it by itself. Second, I cannot see any 2 or 3 major powers want to take a joint efforts, provide a collective leadership. Someone used the term Tramerica, someone talking about G2. Seems to me the current trade war between these 2 countries and cannot make none of this happen. No, neither Tramerica nor G2. Okay, so if we're talking about what will happen in next 5 years, I will say, in terms of the security, in this area, generally speaking, the nuclear weapons will guarantee the world peace. And Jack Ma, maybe someone you heard that, he said the new technology will bring the 3rd World War to the human being. But he didn't say how long. And if he said that eventually, well, I never argue about that. He said that in 10,000 years, and then we have the 3rd World War. Maybe, who knows? But 100% sure, within 5 years and even 10 years, it won't happen. Nuclear weapon can guarantee the global general peace for Cold War, and it will play the function to continue to guarantee the general peace of the world. That means nuclear weapon can prevent the World War III and within the next 10 years. Well, it's the world is a general peace, but it doesn't mean that you feel no any kind of military conflicts between the major powers or among the nation states. Military competition will be speed up the military modernization. Not only the U.S., Trump administration has gave a huge increase of military budget for the 2019, and China have keep on the improve its military capability for several years. I think that will continue for the next 10 years. And then you find that Japan also considering to increase the military budget beyond the political constraint, 1% of the GDP. And the Indian do the same. Indian and use his every efforts to increase the military budget to modernize troops. Russia's economy has already become so unprosperous, and Putin still concerned that he should spend as much as possible on military equipment. So, from my understanding, the military competition in next 5 years will be illustrated by the modernization of military equipment or weaponry. So the weaponry modernization will be inevitable. And unfortunately, this kind of military modernization will cause some military or security tension among the major powers. Like this morning and yesterday, people talking about South China Sea. And my understanding, the competition between China, the military competition between China and the US over the China Sea is inevitable. And that will continue, maybe become the worst. But I also make a brief prediction, no matter what kind of confrontation between them, and none of them dare go to war. That means I don't think China and the US will fall into war in the South China Sea in the next 5 years. Even Trump win the second election. And then economy. In terms of the economy, my understanding, the laborist order and can survive That means free trade norms can survive. Even there's a trade war. Even there's a increased tension between the trade relationship and, of China and the US. But if you look at that, through this negotiation, China promised that I'm going to purchase more from the US. And also you find that to dealing with the tension and the trade tension with the United States, EU and Japan reached the agreement to establish the largest free trade zone in the world. Meanwhile, China talked with ASEAN, want to upgrade 10+1. Also means reduce the tax. And Trump is labeled as protectionism, right? He set up the additional tariff on the Chinese export to the US. But if you look at his policy toward his neighbors, he's unhappy with the NAFTA. But then what? He used bilateral diplomacy talk with Mexico and Canada. The result is that actually US will import more from Canada and Mexico. And the tariff trade is reduced rather than increased. So generally speaking, this current war, from my understanding, is based on the idea of protectionism. But the result possibly will advance or continue the free trade principle. That means the whole world, the general level of the tariff would decrease rather than increase. So I think that's the objective standard or reference to judge the norm or the trade order is a free trade or is a fair trade. So I think in trade area, the next 5 years are possibly moving in that direction. But in terms of the finance, the situation will be different. And the country will become cautious to tighten control the flow of the capital. And this is different from the trade. And the control the flow of the capital. It's not because these countries want to improve their economy, but for prevent the coming financial crisis. 2008 financial crisis caused trouble to everyone, but then they found those countries control the capital flow tighten, suffered less. That's why this time more and more countries already prepared for that. And also most people believe the next financial crisis or economic crisis will come very soon, either this year or next year. That's why the government started. I'm not an economist. I cannot predict anything like that. But most journalists and economists are people talking things like that. And the more people talking about that, the government becomes more cautious. And so they say, oh, we have to keep our cash. And without cash, we cannot deal with the coming crisis. That's it. So this financial order will change in the other direction. The third thing is about the flow of the human resources. And this anti-immigration trend, from my understanding, will gain momentum. The government will tighten the border control. The border can be any kind of border, electric border, and the immigration border, a trade border, information border. Okay. I mean the border of a human resources movement. And it's not only happened in Europe, like Hungary and Bulgaria and some countries said, no, we no longer to insist on the Schengen agreements. And they tighten the control of the passport and do not allow those people and who come, the immigrants and comes through their country to the other European countries. And I think the border control becomes tightened. The reason is that that's a government's instrument. That's a counter-globalization strategy. Actually, my understanding, no government like a globalization. Because globalization undermines every country's sovereignty. That means undermines the government power. And before we have the government so effectively control the country, there's no passport, no visa. Human being can travel anywhere. And we see that we have the Western travel, the novel, right? The Monkey King and protect the monk, Tang Xuanzang, and travel through the many countries to India. There's no passport. And they do not need passport. They do not need visa. They can travel freely. And today, Thailand is doing better, and without a visa requirement for many countries. But not every country like you. And many countries tighten their visa control. And even the European countries, and US certainly, and this becomes a serious domestic politics about the illegal immigration. So that is a trend opposite from globalization. The last the situation is about this technology. This will be very serious. And the world has moved into the age of the knowledge economy. It means the knowledge is the major resources for generating wealth. The major resources produce the country's power. And it's a major resources to cultivate the country's national capability. And that means, and the smart people who can manage the digital technology, they can accumulate wealth very, very fast. And Tsinghua University is produce a lot of engineers, and especially and have with special knowledge about the digital, with the digital equipments and the digital economy. So we have a lot of the young people. They can accumulate the wealth to 100 million just within 3 or 4 years. That's impossible, not for their parents, and even for these millionaires before. They cannot do it. But nowadays the situation changed. So if I can tell you the story, it's come from my sister. He immigrated to Australia, and one day her neighbor come to her and cried to complain about his daughter. And he said he saved a lot of gold jewelries. And he told his daughter, hey, and when you marry the day, I gave it to you. There's a lot of gold, and can make you, can guarantee your rest of life. Then his daughter told his mother, said, Mother, if you want to wear them, you do it. If you do not want to wear them, you give to others. I cannot, in Chinese, 我丢不起那人. I'm so ashamed if I wear these things. His mother's cried. So what kind of children? You didn't show any respect to your mother's love. I love you, gave you gold. But for these generations, wait a minute, I do not want to have a gold. Why I have possess the gold? For what? So the E generation are very different. In America, they call them the millennials. In China, we call them the post-80s. Nowadays, the post-90s came to power. Now, come into the society. They will change the human beings' mentality. They definitely won't share my ideology. I'm 100% sure. I never expected, and I can shape their ideology. They have their own ideology, and also I strongly recommend the E generation. And you don't expect it to shape your children's ideology. They will be very different from you also. That's a human being and the history. So in that way, I would say, and the change is so much. It's not only politically, its change is also socially. Do our politicians understand that? Do our politicians understand that our children is going to create a world of so different that you can never know what it is? And when the generation of my age becomes stumbling, cannot move very freely, they have lost the capability to control the world. And the millennials will create the world according to their own mentality and their ideology and their own will. So here, in next 5 years, I will say, the technology will play a very important role, possibly to divide the world. The world will be divided according to the technology. And I remember 4 years ago, they said the society was divided, the classes were divided, no longer by proletariat and bourgeoisie, but by the people possessing knowledge and the people without knowledge. And now, possibly, the country will be divided, the digital economy country and non-digital economy country. So now in China, and I find in Thailand, and start more and more people use the WeChat to pay that. And so it's Shenzhen, a city, and you know, and just side by side with Hong Kong. And the mayor tried to produce the first non-cash city. And most people in that city no longer use cash. They pay use WeChat or the 支付宝, the electric payment. That means even the farmers who never possess a credit card suddenly jumped from cash to what? To WeChat. Well, the story like this, and the kids grown up with the WeChat, because WeChat are already used for several years in Shenzhen and earlier, and the kids at the 5 or 6, for them, paying with the WeChat is their life. So when their parents take them out to some foreign countries as a tourist, and he tells them, "Mother, you see, they use a paper to pay for the goods. They have no concept of money. They have no concept to use the bills." And so this kind of change will make the world in what? I don't mean it's moving in the good direction. Very possibly, combined with the globalization, make the polarization even worse. At both international level and domestic level, the polarization becomes worse and worse because some people possess knowledge of the digital economy, some people don't. And this gap will be enlarged by the knowledge. And so the education becomes very, very important. And why I'm not so sure any government is prepared for do that kind of education and make every citizen and possess knowledge of the digital economy. And last one is about the political change. The political change is already happened. You find that the strong man is coming back. And many countries, and I do not list the names, but everyone knows that. And the strong man, the Trump is not alone. He's not unique. There's many, many similar leaders. They make policy without consultation with the assistants. They prefer to make decisions by themselves. And then this kind of a strongman politics is coming back. I cannot understand why. But I noted that this kind of international phenomenon just happened wave after wave in 1930s. And you find many countries' national leaders, what? Militaries. And then we have World War II. Before that, we have nationalist leaders, popular in most of the European countries. Then we have World War I. And then in 1930s, we have militarist leaders, Then we have World War II. And then we have nationalist leaders again. Then we have the independence movement prevail all over the Latin America and Africa. And then in 1990s, we have liberalist leaders and in many, many countries. And then what we also witness the war in Middle East and in Somalia and many, many places. And this time, we get another wave. We have a lot of strongman leaders back. And no one can find any single term to label them in aspect of ideology. Maybe they have different ideologies, but their policy, the style of their policy making have some similarity. So then we come to people try to understand why. Why suddenly the society, no matter democratic society or non-democratic society, and have this kind of national leaders? And some people attribute this and to the financial crisis of 2008. Because people said that, no, you see, without a strong leadership, we cannot deal with the crisis. We need a strong government and to have efficient policy to save us from the crisis. And some people say, no, it's because of the decline of liberalism. And liberals have to go too far, people dislike it. And people said, okay, we prefer have a traditional thought. And so you find that there's not only in China, many intellectuals like to discuss about the preaching's history and preaching's philosophy. And also in US, in Europe, and they want to resume classical wedding. People say we need a classical wedding and a huge wedding to what? Prevent the divorce. Because divorce, the rate of divorce increased too fast. And in the UK, and the divorce rate is in some way faster than the marriage. And so the people said, no, we no longer like this kind of liberal society. We want something conservative. I don't know. I cannot make any judgment about who is right, who is wrong. But one thing is clear, that people dissatisfied with the reality. People want to have change. How Obama win the election? Based only one word, change. Okay, he win the election by change, but then Americans are dissatisfied with his policy. He said, okay, you only change the color of the skin. You didn't change anything else. So this time, Hillary failed in the election, and the people said that we no longer trust the Democrats because this time you will change the gender, but not change the policy. They said we want a substantial change. Actually, not only in US, in many countries, people say we want to have a substantial change. Maybe this so-called substantial change are very different according to different countries. So anyhow, this is a general trend. I will use one term to describe this kind of trend. It's a diversity. The word politically diversified, wide and wide. You can hardly make people find the common consensus. Finally, I will talk about East Asia. How about our region? And China's rise and make a lot of people feel, hey, we feel the fear. And China's rise will make this region becomes more prosperous, or China's rise will bring war to us. And that's people's uncertain about it. If China makes this region rich and make the region prosperous, everyone like it. If China's fell into war with the US and coincidentally not fighting in the North American, but fighting in East Asia, people say, no, that's dangerous. Okay, from my understanding, East Asia, the peace in East Asia will be guaranteed by two factors. First, and the nuclear weapons. You can find that even North Korea possess that limited nuclear capability, a very primitive nuclear equipment. The US gave up the idea to attack North Korea with a military force. That illustrates the theory. As long as two countries possess nuclear weapons, and no matter how primitive it is, and these countries will not fall into larger scale war. When now India possesses nuclear weapons, and Pakistan followed the Indians' suit, and people worry about that. They said, no, this is dangerous. And why? They said, because they are not superpowers, not like US and the Soviet Union. They are not as rational as the superpowers. Then the history tells us they are exactly the same rational as the superpowers when they possess nuclear weapons. Since these two countries possess nuclear capabilities, and the military conflicts between these countries dramatically declined, the war and between these countries becomes less and less possible. So I mean that nuclear weapons can guarantee the general security in this region. Second factor is the military balance between the US and China. Actually, the peace for East Asia since 1991, mainly, that's my view, based on the bipolar configuration for this region. Not globally. Today we're talking about the bipolarization. It's about global configuration. But for regional configuration, it's different. Middle East is multipolar configuration. In Africa, multipolar configuration. But if you go to the Latin American, that's unipolar. And Brazil dominating that region. For East Asia, actually, for a long time, have been a bipolar configuration for this region between China and the US. Just nowadays becomes more and more obvious. So this bipolar, I mean, in terms of military, not in economy. Economy, Japan was the #1 country in this region in the 1990s. China economically surpassed Japan is moving into the 21st century, not a later 20th century. So I mean, this bipolar configuring East Asia in terms of military. This military bipolar configuration guaranteed neither China nor the US dare to initiate a war in this region. That's why we cannot, we enjoyed this longer peace. But in the Europe, it's the opposite. And the balance between NATO and US and Russia totally changed. The balance disappeared, and then what? And Russia becomes weaker and weaker. The balance was broken, and then they experienced 3 wars. And in this region, it's just the opposite. The military gap between China and the US is decreasing rather than increasing. So I think the more balance militarily between these two countries, and it's safer, this country from military clashes. How about the regions, this East Asia, diplomacy? In terms of diplomacy, and it seems to me, bipolar diplomacy is gaining momentum, and the multilateral diplomacy being undermined. You look at this, and not only US prefer bilateral talk with China, and US prefer bilateral talk with everyone. Even with Japan, with South Korea. The typical case is North Korea's nuclear issue. 6-party talk have been there for more than a decade, right? More than 10 years. And the 6-party talk cannot find any solution to settle down the nuclear disputes in Korean Peninsula. And the US talk with China, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, and individually. So this bilateral diplomacy and lead to the summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un. And now I think they are going to have another one, and very soon, and another summit, and all through the bilateral diplomacy. And so you find that not only in terms of security and the trade, and now people talking about bilaterally in this region, and it seems to me the cooperation will become this negative part about the conflicts. About the cooperation part, also the bilateral is gaining momentum. First, China's One Belt, One Road projects, most of them are bilateral projects. And you look at this exchange program, students exchange program, bilateral. You can hardly find any multilateral students exchange program. So I don't know it's good or bad, but obviously the governments in this region and find that we should be realistic, and bilateral diplomacy will help us to settle down the disputes, will help us to improve our cooperation in all fields. The reason is very simple. There's no whole regional architecture. Do we have any international institution for East Asia? No. We have one, ASEAN, for Southeast Asia only. Even Southeast Asia, the ASEAN as an organization seldomly have any touch with the North Korea's nuclear issues. They do not want to be involved into the Northeast Asia's problem. So from my understanding, before we have an East Asian regional institution, it's difficult to make the multilateral diplomacy as the main approach for regional cooperation or settle down regional, solve the regional problems. And finally, I would write up about this, the very academic issue. How about the East Asians' value? Now, I discussed about the competition between different ideologies. To East Asia, we can provide a kind of ideology shared by the rest of the world? I don't know. But many countries, including India, they say, hey, the Western ideology have dominating the world for 200 years. Well, our Oriental culture, including India, Japan, South Korea, the ASEAN countries, and China, they said, look at this, this region. We have a very different history, very different culture, and a different food. Even people call us a chopstick culture, right? We do not use forks and knives. Actually, people told me why we prefer chopsticks rather than forks and knives. They think because forks and knives are very dangerous. And on the dinner table, you may use it as a weapon to kill the other. But chopsticks are safe, right? Well, no matter what, actually, we have to admit it that culturally, this region, I mean East Asia, we have a very different culture. The ideology, even the liberalism is so popular after the Cold War, and many countries, many governments followed this liberalist ideology. But for Western countries still feel, hey, you are not the same like us. You are backward from us. Your ideology is not so modern like us. But now, it seems to me, this situation is changed. And the people in East Asia revalue our own ideology. I do not mean the communist ideology. I do not mean the official ideology. I mean our social culture. We call it a political culture. This region has our culture because this culture makes this region different. And also some people believe. And this region can have the economic growth faster than Europe because the culture. It's not because the similarity, but because the difference. Because we're not exactly the same like Europeans, so we can make the economy growing faster than Europe. And that's the reason. And also people start finding that, hey, this region really have a longer peace than other regions. So especially the people from the Malaysia told me, look at that. Our religion is a Muslim, but we're peaceful Muslim. Our Muslim different from their Muslim. I said, what's the difference? They said, we have a different culture from them. We have some religion, but with different culture. So same, and you may have the same political system like Europe, but then you have a different culture from the Europe. This specialty, this difference makes this region positively and growing faster, develop faster, more peaceful. Negatively, maybe causes some unpleasant things. I don't know. And from the Europeans' eyes, and our culture is not that modern, not that advanced. Finally, I will say, East Asia will inevitably become the center of the world, no matter you like it or not. The world center already started to shift from the Europe towards the East Asia. China, Japan, and South Korea. There's 3 countries' GDP is already larger than EU. If plus ASEAN, and much larger than whom, and then EU plus Russia, right? ASEAN's GDP is larger than Russia. So what military budget, the same. And their region's military budget is larger than the Europe. Okay, the more money you have, the more military capability you have, inevitably you have more influence than the other regions. Meanwhile, it's not necessary you have more money is a good thing. And when I was poor, I never worried being robbed. I had nothing. When I was poor, I never worried about my children being kidnapped because no one will kill my children. They're so poor. When you become rich, you have problem. Security becomes a big problem. The wealth, and then you find because this region accumulates wealth faster, then what? All of the major powers will compete for this. They will compete for the dominance, influence in this region. So being the world center means 2 things. First, means you have more influence than other regions. Second, it means there's more tensions in this region because of the competition among the major powers. Okay, and we'll open the, can we open the floor to the audience for questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, now it's an opportunity for every one of us to ask for the questions because it have covered a lot of, several fields according to globalization, economics, and politics. Here is a good opportunity for anyone to ask a question. Please raise your hand and the microphone will be transferred to you.
Professor, first of all, thank you very much for your intriguing lecture today. I'm very happy to have you and your colleagues here. I just would like to steal this opportunity because I believe that it would be like many more questions to come. So I'm from the Institute of Diplomacy and International Study as well, and I have a few questions for you. First of all, you were mentioning about, in the era that the U.S. has been retreating from taking responsibility as a world leader, and also in the era that Western ideology like liberalism and democracy is on decline. In this kind of situation, do you think China is going to step up and take that kind of responsibility? And also, talking about ideology, what kind of ideology that China will bring upon as it take up that responsibility? Would that be national interest, or sovereignty, integrity, or what else? I'm not sure. That's the first question. And second question, I also have the question about, you're talking about the world of bipolarity. And from your article on foreign affairs, I found that you mentioned also that the US is kind of remain in its own hemisphere. And China also remain in its own hemisphere. And that's why they can coexist peacefully for, the time being. But in the future, I wonder how this kind of situation will last for, I'm not sure how long it will last for. Because if we see it today, right, we can see that the US often infringe on the ideology that, or you kind of have the ideology clash. US criticize China for the issue like human rights, for example. So I'm not sure this kind of peaceful coexistence can last for that long. And the last question, talking about your cultural realism, which was mentioned in John Mearsheimer's book, the Tragedy of Great Power Politics, right? And from his interpretation, he said it incorporates the concept of Confucianism. And based on this kind of cultural realism means China will be benevolent superpower. But anyway, from his interpretation as well, Confucianism or your cultural realism doesn't deny the use of force if any state is considered as immoral. So the question is, if any state infringe on China national interest, or the case of South China Sea, for example, will that state be considered as immoral? And what China will do with this kind of situation? Thank you.
Okay. Well, I have 3 questions. And the first is whether China ready to replace U.S. leadership. And from my understanding, the answer is very clear and very simple, is no. And first, it's beyond China's capability to undertake this leadership. And to undertake leadership requires a capability. It's not only the will. That's very important. And the second, and the Chinese government officially have repeated several times, and China don't want to challenge U.S. leadership. And even we do not follow Americans' leadership, at least we do not want to challenge Americans' leadership. And third, and from the very practical perspective, and China must understand that, and the U.S. has involved in a lot of issues which requires a kind of a very costly and also very dangerous leadership. That means that kind of leadership undermines Americans' national capability. The typical case is Afghanistan. And the war in Afghanistan is the longest war the U.S. fought in its history of the last 200 years. And from 2001 until now, it's 18 years, much longer than the war in Vietnam. And the U.S. have consulted with China about this issue. They said whether China and to take over the military camps, to send the PLA into the country, to maintain the government, the current government. And the China's answer is very, very simple. First is that, now, this problem kicked out by yourself. You should take responsibility for it. Because the war launched by the United States, not by others, all right? And so this issue kicked out by yourself. You should implement that job. So China strongly encouraged the U.S. to stay there. Don't get your troops out, and stay there as longer as possible. And so you can understand that. And not only this, and the U.S. also understand that this kind of leadership is very, very costly and undermine their national resources. So from these 3 perspectives, I don't think China is ready to undertake, to fill the vacuum left by the United States. That's why my prediction, in the next 5 years, it's very possible we are going to witness a world without global leadership. That is a new situation. The second question is about how long China and the US can keep this peaceful coexistence. And my understanding, and when we're talking about peaceful coexistence, and can be defined in two concepts. First, peaceful coexistence means there's no war. I think I can guarantee that, and it's almost no danger for China and the US to fall into direct war in the next 5 years. But the second definition about the peaceful coexistence means cooperation. It means whether China and the US can cooperate with each other, provide a joint leadership, and to cooperate with each other and make the world safer, and make the world economy grow faster, and bring more prosperous for the whole world. I doubt about that. Currently, and it seems to me very difficult for these two countries to develop cooperation. At least, and the Trump administration don't think cooperation is the right solution for Americans' national interests. And in that way, and I think this is difficult. Second problem comes from the Chinese side. By now, our government denies the core of the character of the relationship between China and the US is a competition. Our government firmly believes the relationship between China and the US is cooperative. Cooperation is the core of our relationship, not competition. So when American professor, Harvard professor asked me, how can we make China and the US to establish the mechanism or regimes to manage the competition between these two countries, prevent the competition escalating into military clashes? I think it's a very, very right thinking. But then I asked him, and with a question, I said, if China do not admit it, there is a competition between China and the US. How can you establish a management, a mechanism to manage the competition? From Chinese, there's no competition. What we should manage? So my understanding, if we want these two countries to cooperate more, these two countries must, both sides, admit it. The core of the relationship is a competition, not cooperation. If any sides believe there's no competition, I doubt they can cooperate with each other. Only they admit it, the competition is a core part of the relationship. They will consider how to manage the cooperation, and how to manage the competition, how to prevent competition escalating to disaster, and also, academically, they will considering to develop preventative cooperation. Preventative cooperation refers to the cooperation prevent the disaster or military confrontation between the two countries. It's opposite from the positive cooperation. So it also means negative cooperation. Positive cooperation means that let's work together against the third party. And like the members of the NATO's, there's a positive cooperation against Russia. Preventative cooperation is not against the third party, but against each other, against the partners of the cooperation. Prevent. I think ASEAN countries have a very clear mind about preventative cooperation since ARF established. And use these confidence-building measures and to prevent conflicts among ASEAN countries. So this is called the cooperative cooperation. So at this moment, as long as China and the US As long as U.S. don't think cooperation benefit U.S., and China do not admit it, the competition is very serious. It's a core part of the relationship. I doubt they can develop that kind of very substantial and widely preventative cooperation. So neither the joint leadership. The last question is about the Confucianism. Well, Confucianism is very influential, and not only in China, and also in Japan, in South Korea, and in many ASEAN countries. Confucianism is a philosophy, and for the Europeans and the Americans and even the Africans, they regarded Confucianism as a religion. Actually, for East Asian countries, say, no, this is not religion. This is a philosophy. This is a culture. Okay, Confucianism is very powerful. In China, Confucianism is still in our blood, to govern our family life, right? We require the kids to be filial to the parents. But the Confucianism are not official ideology. Confucianism not advocated by any East Asian countries. In East Asia, some countries like China, Vietnam, North Korea, their official ideology is communism. It's totally different from Confucianism. Confucianism governs the people's life, but not government policy. In Thailand, Philippines, and Indonesia, and Singapore, Confucianism also governs family life, but not govern your policy. Your policy is greatly guided by liberalism. So when Confucianism are not official ideology, only social ideology and shared by people, it's difficult for Confucianism become a dominating or global influential ideology to, in the coming years. So that's my understanding, my response to these three questions.
Thank you very much, Professor. In case you have more questions, please feel free to ask Professor questions.
Hello, everyone. 你好，严教授. I'm Chinese too. I have a small question to ask you. Before today, I haven't a chance to ask this question to an expert, so I'm glad to be here to listen your lecture. In your lecture, you said that technology, like WeChat, like AI, like robots, plays an important role in our life. So I think the technology you mentioned it should include the application like Facebook, Twitter, and Google products like that. So my question is, why government don't allow us Chinese people use the products like Google products, Facebook? So because several months I will go back China. I won't have the chance to use them. If I want to use the products, I have to use the VPN.
Yes.
So we call it 翻墙. So
yes.
Please answer my question with your international politics knowledge. Thank you.
Well, first, I think I share your view. And if we can use Twitter and Google Scholar at mainland China, it is much more convenient for us to do the research, right? So I'm really want to, there's no such a kind of control about it. The second, and this already become a serious issue between China and the US during the negotiation of the trade war. And the US want to have China to allow Google, Twitter, this digital economy come to China, invest in China independently, not a shared, not a joint venture. The reason is very simple. Because the digital economy is growing bigger and bigger, the share of the whole China's GDP is growing. So for US concern, hey, you cannot cut off that big slice from investment. Only allow the American investing in some periphery area. I want to invest in this prosperous field. So now I think there's a negotiation. The main block, like you said, is because of the Chinese government political concern about this, whether can allow this company to operate their the company, run their company, and according to their will, or according to Chinese government requirements. Well, if you ask me why, I will tell you my personal understanding, like your understanding. I think there's a kind of fear. The fear about, this fear has been there for decades. And do you remember that? Oh, you cannot remember that because you was not born in 1980s when we opened the door. You may be the post-90s. And when Deng Xiaoping opened the country, we adopted the policy called the opening up and the reform policy. And many people oppose this idea. That, wait a minute. If you open this country, and many bad things and bad ideas will come in. You got it? So Deng Xiaoping have to face with this situation. How can I persuade people that? And I open the window, and then some flies and the mosquitoes will come into the room. That's true. Then Deng Xiaoping tell them, I know. If we open the window, the mosquitoes and the flies will come in. And also we get fresh air. The fresh air is the main thing. It's the more important and bring the more healthy to us and rather than the damage caused by the flies and the mosquitoes. So for him, he gave the analysis. Opening up the door and benefits China more than close the door. Today, the opening up policy is no longer is the trade, investment, finance, and education is come to the cyber, right? Because moving into the age of knowledge, cyber economy becomes the most important part. How much we can open the internet, that becomes the issue. So if you ask me why, I will say there's still that kind of a very old traditional fear exists. They worry about open without the firewall, and the negative information will flow in, and then will cause some social unhealthy things. So from my understanding, this is already caused debate at home. Many people argue that, including me. We think the most effective strategy to win the war, the trade war, is not to close the door. It's not to make the country protected by the firewalls. It's just the opposite. We should open the door. Because the last 40 years experience tell us we become more prosperous than before. We growing faster than before, especially when we compare with India. You know, in 1980s, our situation and India quite similar, maybe even worse than India. How can we develop faster than India in the last 40 years? Because we are more open than Indian. Indian is more democratic than China, no doubt. But Indian is closed society. They do not open as much as China. So from my understanding, our own experience tell us we need to open the country as wider as possible. So my answer to you, and your suggestion, I think is good, but I'm not so sure your suggestion will become the policy. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, over there. Oh, yes.
Oh. Oh, sure. Oh, I'm looking for you. Where are you?
I'm a Chinese Jew.
Okay.
It's lucky to meet you, but I want to know the question. Because I know that many people say Chinese and US, who can be a leader? Who is stronger, who can be a leader? Right? So don't think about the who. I just want to know how. How we can be a number one and how we can be stronger. And what part our Chinese can be positive to the Asia and to the world. What part? Where part? Okay, that's all.
Okay, let me repeat his question in case someone didn't get, because people at the back may not get your voice. And his question is that how China can become stronger than the United States, and what are positive things China can provide to East Asian countries. First, I think according to my very limited knowledge and in our history, and I was born in 1952, and just 3 years after the PRC established. And through my life, I think this country improved the fast period is 1980s. Definitely, 1980s much poorer than now. 1980s even less open than now. But then what? In 1980s, there's a whole country, every citizen, and find that we're moving in the right direction. We want to make the country rich. We want to make the country as advanced as these advanced countries. So this aspiration and held by everyone, so people work very hard. And then they make all of this progress. Today, how can we make China stronger than the US? And first, we must admit it. We are weaker than the US. What do I mean? It means we have a lot of defects. We have a lot of shortcomings, not as good as the US. Even the US, and it's not that nice country to China, we also have to learn from the US their advantage, learn their strong points. So that is Confucianism. Confucius makes the argument that you can learn from anyone when you work with the other two peoples. He's very safe. He's not so sure about if you work with one person and he knows something you don't know, right? Maybe he's concerned, maybe you're smarter than your wife, so two person is not make sense. So he said, when three people work together, definitely one of them knows something you don't know. So what do I mean? It means China first have to admit it, our shortcomings, our defects, our problems. Only we face these problems and frankly, and then we're looking for the methods, approaches to solve the problem, to improve ourselves. That's one thing. So at this moment, we cannot too proud of ourselves. We do make a progress faster than the other countries. But then, even that, we have to talk the question, okay, why we cannot make the more faster than ourselves? Why we still cannot make this country as strong as the US? There must be something wrong, right? So I think this is very important. In the Chinese, we say, 我们需要自省. That means 自省 means you look into yourself to find your own shortcomings. Second, and how can we make this country stronger than the US? My understanding, we have to continue Deng Xiaoping's strategy, opening up and reform. Actually, not only Chinese, every country, including Americans, they require what? they require social reform. That's why they use the term change. Change what? Change the US. So they ask the government to take initiative to change the country. That means reform. Then we have the question. We change the question in what direction? We change the country according to what standard? We change the country with what kind of reference? That's the problem. So from my understanding, that's why Deng Xiaoping put the two things together, opening up. Opening means open the country to view the world. Then you can find some country have something better than us. Then we just learn that spot, learn that point. And so opening up will make us understand what is wrong, what is right. What is progressive, what is retrogressive. And what is represent the future, what is represent the history. And so opening up, decide, as only when we open the country, we know what is the direction for us to change the country. Only when we open up this country, then we can find the standard and the reference for us to make decision how to change this country. So if you ask me how, I think in every field, they have the special approaches and knowledge of how to do it. But in general, we should open up the country and then reform us continuously, no stop. There's a wrong concept and finish or implement a reform. This is a wrong concept. Reform can never be ended because the world is changing and the society is changing and always face new things. The reform can never stop. One after another, just continue. So the second part about what a positive thing we can bring to the world. I think we can bring to the world two things. First is lessons, which is more important than experience. A lot of our experience are not suitable for other countries. This country, we have a different culture, different history, and different mentality, and different customers. And I don't think that any country can copy China's model very successfully. And even Chinese government clearly stated that what is the precondition for the success of China's economic development? Oh, do any of you know that? It's a Chinese Communist Party's rule. This is a precondition. Without this precondition, and we don't think you copy our model can achieve the same success. And so, from my understanding, our lessons is more important for other countries to learn. That means don't repeat the mistake we made. And for instance, and we suffered a lot, and we suffered more than you from this maize. The haze and the smog is very serious in Beijing and in many cities. And the reason is that when we get this foreign investment to China at the beginning, we never concern what kind of pollution they will bring to this country. We only concern how much money they can produce. Then, along with the growth of the capability of production, and then you find that the environment being undermined. Not only air, and also the water polluted by this industry. So now we noted that now when we attract the foreign investment, we must concern, hey, wait a minute, we said we should check what the result of this pollution, whether they bring in is a so-called green technology or is a traditional technology. So I think last 40 years, we have a lot of lessons and it can be learned by the other countries. So this is one. This other thing, I think is too simple. This country's improvement, or this country is prosperous, and makes this country have a huge consumption capability. We can purchase things. We can consume things. Then many countries need a consuming market. They have to sell their things to China, and this is, I think, will be a very positive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I think that should be the last question for today's lecture, and I would like to pass the stage back to our MC for the next session.
Thank you, Professor Yuan. And next, I would like to take the opportunity to request Dr. Nare to do the honor of presenting a souvenir to Professor Yuan. And next, I would like to invite all of the guests to the stage for the group photo. For the students, could you please wait for a minute? We would like to all of you to do the evaluation at the end of this lecture. So could you please wait?
Okay, as the time alive is end, on behalf of Ramsey.